Hello to all once again. We're back with another marvelous video. As Rings of Power continues to unearth the lesser-known history of the forces of evil and those of light, fans are surely marveling at the way Tolkien crafted his characters. Titular evil forces like Sauron, Morgoth, or even the orcs have certainly been a fascinating subject. But did you know some creatures in the story can rival these harbingers of darkness in their ways? Tolkien explains these creatures in great detail, and we see one of them come to life in Peter Jackson's early works. More recently, we've seen a glimpse of this monstrous evil in Rings of Power itself, when it clashes with Isildur. Despite the rather short screen time, the show has in part confirmed that this creature is none other than the one that Samwise Gamgee had faced many years later, on his way to accompanying Frodo Baggins to destroy the One Ring. You guessed it, we're talking about Shelob, the great evil spider that resides at Cirith Ungol. In the films, CGI was used to portray her, and it certainly gave her the dreaded aura that Tolkien himself had written about. Spiders are some of the common lesser antagonists in the whole story, with those in Mirkwood forming an important part in the narrative of the Hobbit films. Ever wondered if those spiders had anything in common with the one we'd seen Frodo and Sam battle? Shelob happens to be the mother of the spiders who moved into Mirkwood later, and you can say that they were somewhat lucky because it's widely believed that Mommy would sometimes eat her children to satisfy her never-ending hunger. This is probably an inherited trait from Shelob's own parent, the terrifying creature that had almost managed to bring Morgoth to his knees, Ungoliant. This primordial beast would consume light and pretty much everything else she found fanciful. Shelob is mentioned to be her last child, before she fled to the south and became a legend. So now that we know Shelob was birthed by one of the most terrifying creatures Middle-earth had ever witnessed, her role in Rings of Power as well as Lord of the Rings becomes quite interesting. Without further ado, let's delve into the lore of Shelob, her origins and abilities, and explore her hideous anatomy. Before we go into our explanation, we have a very small request. If you like our content, please support us by subscribing to our channel. This is a small click for you, but for us it means a lot. Thank you. Let's begin. Who is Shelob in Lord of the Rings? Shelob would take up residence in the borders of Mordor, where she would feast indiscriminately on anything that would cross her path. While men and elves were always her top choice, her ever-piggish sense of hunger was not picky, and she would resort to eating orcs when no other food source would be available. Most of her early history is not known, except that she was Ungoliant's last child and was born in the arid Gorgoroth. She remained in Nan-Dorgotheb for a while, and left Beleriand sometime during the First Age. Ungoliant, her mother, had numerous other children with other evil creatures of spider form, but it's not known if Shelob's siblings had survived the ruin of Beleriand. She moved into Fel-Duath, on the western border of Mordor, long before Sauron had arrived. There, Shelob would mate with and kill the lesser broods of creatures, and eventually populate a large part of Middle-earth with her descendants. The men of Gondor had built Minas Ithil in the Second Age, near the western end of the pass, and then the Tower of Cirith Ungol in the Third Age. Both fortresses were captured by Sauron later, and he was aware of Shelob's existence. She weaved a network of webs in numerous caves, and would devour anything and anyone that could be lured in. Much like her parent, Ungoliant, Shelob had a hunger that could never be satisfied, and had no other quality than gluttony. Many fans hold that while most antagonists crave power, fame, and absolutism, Shelob is peculiar in the sense that she does not bother with anything as long as she can eat. We will explore this in detail later in the video when we discuss whether Shelob was inherently evil or just a creature who committed evil deeds to survive. The appearance of Shelob in Lord of the Rings lore. Ungoliant is said to have taken the form of a giant spider, but was technically a demon. As her spawn, Shelob is therefore part spider and part demon. The extent of Shelob's demonic identity is not explored well enough, and fans usually have conflicting accounts. Her overall appearance resembles that of a huge spider with spindly legs and multiple eyes. Her head was filled with clusters of many windowed eyes on a short neck that resembled a stalk. Reportedly, her head had numerous scars and she was missing some eyes. A beak-like structure dribbled venom, which she would use on her victims to immobilize them before ultimately killing them. However, due to her sheer size, she could also crush her prey to death. The orcs have mentioned how she would prefer to paralyze her prey and trap them in webs before killing and eating them. She was also fond of playing cat and mouse with her victims. Her body was enormous and looked like a bloated bag, black and blotched with numerous marks. Her belly was big and luminous. Her legs were bent and the joints were big and knobbed, which stretched high over her back. Moreover, her legs and hair stuck straight out like sharp steel spines, with claws at the the lower ends. As such, Shelob had extremely thick skin. She could not be pierced by the strength of either man, elf, or dwarf, and this was because of the numerous layers of growth. While it is possible to impale her or to get her considerably hurt by using her own body weight, something Sam had done with the sword sting, it's never revealed how she can be killed for good. Her eyes were a soft spot, and they were very sensitive to light. Tolkien's description of Shelob is somewhat misleading if we're to consider her to be anatomically similar to a spider, even a giant one. Spiders usually have two parts, the cephalothorax, thorax and head, and the abdomen. However, Shelob's outthrust head seems to reflect that her head was separated from the thorax. Then again, the stalk-like neck in the description also seems to suggest a connection between the cephalothorax and the abdomen. Her legs would jut out from not just the cephalothorax like spiders, but also from her abdomen, which is primarily a feature of beetles as opposed to spiders. Moreover, Shelob is mentioned to have a sting, which is a trait spiders do not possess. It can be assumed that Tolkien was either not very familiar with the anatomy of arthropods, or purposely created this odd description of the creature because he wanted to portray her as big, disgusting, and spider-like. Ungoliant was not exactly a spider either, and simply took the form of one, so her spawn was part darkness and inherited some spider-like traits, with the rest of her anatomy being more of a monstrosity than a regular spider's anatomy. Shelob's ultimate desire was to gorge on her prey until she would swell so much that the mountain could no longer hold down her weight, wherein she would make her way to the sea. History of Shelob in the Lord of the Rings lore. As mentioned earlier, Shelob created her lair at Cirith Ungol way before Sauron had arrived in Mordor. He knew about her and mostly did not bother with the information because the spider just happened to be an excellent and incidental guard dog for his territory. Sometimes Shelob would eat the orcs that would man the Tower of Cirith Ungol, who were naturally scared of her and would sometimes try to barricade her lair with stones so she could not reach them. Gollum had almost fallen prey to the spider while he was leaving Mordor, but he managed to spare himself getting eaten after promising her to bring tastier meals. The orcs, however, believed that given how skinny Gollum was, Shelob did not feel any interest in devouring him. Later, he led Frodo and Sam to her lair, believing that she would kill them both and he could get his hands on the One Ring. Shelob pursued the hobbits and almost cornered them, but Frodo's sword sting was of elvish origin, so it was able to cut through her strong and thick webs. The Phial of Galadriel, which had the Star of Earendel and the Light of the Gil Orestel, also proved immensely helpful in fending her off, as it caused tremendous pain to Shelob's dark senses. We will also be talking about how these tools were able to subdue her, despite her parent having a complicated history with them. However, she was able to sting Frodo, who became paralyzed as a result, and she then wrapped him up in her web. Sam was still alive and was desperate to rescue his master from the vile creature. They engaged in a rather odd and unmatched battle, considering that even heroic elves had fallen prey to Ungoliant's offspring, so a mere hobbit, and a gardener at that, barely stood a chance. However, the brave Samwise managed to injure her eye and leg, but she still had the upper hand. Finally, when she tried to inject the hobbit with her venom, he managed to dodge and hurt her abdomen with sting. She was severely wounded and forced to retreat when Sam used the Phial of Galadriel. In perhaps one of the most lopsided battles in Tolkien's entire work, a hobbit was able to defeat the spawn of one of Middle-earth's deadliest beings. No one had been able to harm Shelob to this extent before. Whether Shelob remains alive is a mystery, much like the status of Ungoliant. However, Samwise was able to hear her bubbling in misery somewhere far away when he put on the One Ring, which had allowed his senses to improve vastly. It can be assumed that the spider is alive but has taken an extended leave after being defeated at the hands of a hobbit. However, some fans argue that due to her eyes being badly injured, she could have become blind and therefore unable to hunt for prey as effectively. Ultimately, this would lead to her demise. Exploring the complex personality of Shelob. The evil spider was born during the First Age, which makes her at least several thousand years old. Her life expectancy is nothing less than that of elves, and considering how she's a vastly superior force of nature who can kill almost anyone at will, there's really no telling how long she can be alive. Just like her evil mother, it's probably still stirring up chaos in some nameless part of the world. Shelob could very well be alive even after her encounter with the hobbits, scavenging for food. Shelob is obsessed with food, and as some fans believe, isolation. Her character is just a long list of disgusting and horrifying behaviors, which revolves around a putrid life in complete darkness and sustenance. She's always hungry, a trait she shares with Ungoliant. She feasts on anyone unfortunate enough to cross paths with her, and is known to kill her own children, as well as the creatures she would mate with, some of which happen to be her children yet again. Well, it's never explicitly stated that she eats them, but what else can we expect from Shelob? She would eat anything and everything, and this is canon, because the Two Towers text states that all living things were her food. She did not kill all her offspring though, because many managed managed to scatter to other parts of the world to carry on the family legacy. Now, even though Ungoliant's wretched child was plagued with ravenous hunger, she did have some preferences. Elves and men were probably at the top of the list, and many unfortunate ones did end up being her dinner. But by the events of Lord of the Rings, she did not have a lot of those to fall back on. As the power of Mordor grew to be more terrifying, men did not venture anywhere near the area, and elves had left that part of Middle-earth long ago. Therefore, her diet would be mainly orcs, who were poor food and wear. Gollum also described them as not tasting particularly nice, although it's not known how Gollum is privy to this particular information. The relationship between Sauron and Shelob is largely conflicted, because there are fans who believe they are not allies despite their seemingly good relationship. Some fans also say that considering how Ungoliant was able to subdue Morgoth, the first Dark Lord, as her spawn, Shelob could level evenly against Sauron in a fight, and maybe even defeat him if he did not have the One Ring. However, this does not happen anywhere in the story, so it remains a heated debate among fans. Tolkien also does not explicitly describe the nature of their relationship, but judging from what we have, it can be said that they're neither allies nor enemies. They share a purely symbiotic relationship, because Sauron allows her to do her own bidding, since she's an excellent guard for his territory. As mentioned, she would sometimes eat the orcs, which were technically Sauron's property, so Shelob making mincemeat out of them would normally anger any lord. But Sauron was practical. He knew that he could always replace the orcs, of which he had a pretty endless supply. Moreover, Shelob was a far better watchdog than any orc. Tolkien has mentioned that on some rare occasions, Sauron would even refer to Shelob as his cat. He would often send her food in the form of people or prisoners who he had no use for, or even servants who would annoy him. How she would devour them would always be reported back to Sauron, who would listen to the tales humorously. The spider has no master as such, and serves only herself. She has no business whatsoever with the One Ring, and with gaining power over everything on Middle-earth. This is understood when Gollum thinks that after eating Frodo and Sam, she will discard their clothes and weapons and the One Ring, which she has no use for. Shelob only cares for food. She's unbothered by politics and good and evil. Even though she was already a resident at Cirith Ungol before Sauron's arrival, she's never shown to be territorial. If she houses hostility toward the Dark Lord for driving away people from Mordor and depriving her of quality food, she does not display it. Maybe despite what fans think, Shelob knew she was no match for Sauron, or simply did not bother because she could simply eat his orcs, even if they were not as delicious as men or elves. However, Sauron was likely to be aware of the extent of her powers and possibly her gloomy parentage, which is why he knew that nasty, dirty orcs would not keep the spider satisfied forever. Therefore, he would send her presents in the form of anyone that irked him. Sounds like a master and pet relationship, but maybe just a really cold one. How powerful is Shelob? Being an offspring of Ungoliant, Shelob is indisputably one of the strongest creatures on Middle-earth. While she's not as strong as her mother, who had even managed to physically overpower Morgoth at one point, Shelob is certainly a force to reckon with. It's not known how she traveled all the way to Mordor, but considering she was able to escape and/or survive the ruin of Beleriand, she's probably quite stronger than her siblings. Since Tolkien does not mention any of Ungoliant's other children after the War of Wrath, fans believe that Shelob is the sole survivor. As such, Shelob has devoured innumerable elves and men, so it's obvious that she's an extremely strong and vicious creature. While some men may not be valiant, elves are generally tough enough to take down creatures in their paths. Her sheer size certainly plays a decisive role during one-on-one battles, because her physical prowess can be beyond intimidating and quite advantageous. However, there's no instance of her fighting and/or emerging victorious against a significant number of opponents. She preys on people who stumble across her lair, and that number is not usually very high. Even when she feasts on orcs, she usually does not take them on as a group. That being said, she's definitely a nightmare for wolves, her own children, elves, men, hobbits, and other small creatures. However, when it comes to other wicked beings that may be bigger or stronger than her, Shelob is certainly not an obvious winner. As mentioned, some fans believe she could take on Sauron as long as he did not possess the One Ring. However, many others feel that's a gross overstatement. Even if she had some level of autonomy under Sauron's eye, she was nowhere strong enough to take him in a battle, even without the One Ring. The second Dark Lord did become weaker over time after losing his precious possession, but given how Shelob is not shown to actually fight against any worthy enemy, except Sam, estimating her skills can indeed be difficult. In her comfort zone, in her lair, where she would essentially trap people in her web, it would be close to impossible to defeat her. There's a lot of debate about whether Shelob could square off against a Balrog. When Ungoliant had almost defeated Morgoth, the Balrogs were the ones to chase her away and rescue the Dark Lord. In doing so, they had also injured her considerably, even though she was extremely strong after having consumed the light from the trees of Valinor and some ancient gems, which is why she was even able able to momentarily overpower Morgoth. Considering her spawn would naturally be less powerful than her, Shelob will probably be defeated by a Balrog in a fight. A fully grown dragon could also defeat her quite easily. Maybe Shelob would have a chance against a Nazgul, and even all of them if she did her best. Despite fans believing that she was extremely powerful, the fact that Tolkien never paired her in any real battle, i.e. in any instance where she faced an actual enemy, irrespective of the species of the army, really makes it difficult to believe that Shelob could be powerful beyond a point. There's no cannon fodder to support it. The spider was a gluttonous evil creature that only cared about eating, so even if her body was huge and difficult to injure, she could have been defeated as long as her opponents had numbers. While Samwise Gamgee ultimately being the only one to injure her to the point of retreat is certainly a story of luck and heroism rather than the norm, it ultimately reinforces the idea that Shelob was not all-powerful. How did Shelob compare to Ungoliant? Shelob is the last offspring of Ungoliant, but is in no way even comparable to her when it comes to power. Ungoliant is an ancient primordial being, a Maya, a spirit having great power, who turned malevolent and assumed a spider-like form. Her powers are unimaginably terrifying. She can consume light and create darkness, and was even powerful enough at a point to challenge Morgoth, the first Dark Lord. Her character is the very personification of lust, greed, and desire, since her hunger was not just for food. It encompassed power and light and all things good. Ungoliant played a very deterministic role in the events of the First Age, and had she not retreated south and pretty much disappeared, she would have certainly caused upheaval on a massive scale. In comparison, Shelob does not even come close. She's simply a giant spider with an insatiable hunger. Shelob only cares about being able to consume flesh and nothing else, whereas Ungoliant is more concerned with consuming light. By herself, the second-generation spider is certainly terrifying, as she is the embodiment of gluttony and greed. She was probably stronger than her siblings, the other children of Ungoliant, since she lived on until the Third Age, whereas there has been no mention of any of her other siblings after the War of Wrath. Shelob traveled to Mordor and set up her lair, and for ages trapped all kinds of folk and ate them. When Sauron arrived and set camp in Mordor, he did not bother to get rid of her because of her apparent usefulness, and Shelob did not antagonize him in any way either. Whether she knew she was no match for him, or because she simply did not bother about anyone as long as she got to eat, is not clear. Therefore, while Shelob and Ungoliant are both definitely horrifying entities, they do not get to sit at the same table. The former is more of a localized terror, as she keeps to herself and just wants to eat. Ungoliant, on the other hand, was a being that challenged Morgoth himself because of how powerful she had become, and it took the Dark Lord to cry out for his Balrogs to help fend her off. She also has the ability of Unlight, which is a vast darkness that no light could penetrate or escape from, something her children did not inherit. Shelob was a scary being, but nowhere close to being the cosmic terror her mother was, as she chose only to prey on the weak that would fall into her trap. While Ungoliant reflected an existential and all-consuming threat, Shelob was simply a dark and filthy creature. She instilled fear in the heart of orcs and men alike, but had Ungoliant still been around during this time, Sauron would have been much busier. Is Shelob truly evil, or just a giant spider surviving by instinct? And why is she seen as evil in The Lord of the Rings? Most fans unanimously agree that Shelob was indisputably an evil creature. That being said, most spiders are not considered to be fair creatures, and this one's a giant grisly-looking one at that. Despite this, some fans believe that she was not inherently evil. Her deeds were simply a method to survive. As a huge spider, she needed to consume prey big enough to soothe her appetite. Whatever be the consensus among fans, in Lord of the Rings, she's definitely portrayed as an evil creature. The very first reason for this is her being one of Ungoliant's children. Shelob's parent was one of the greatest threats to the world during the First Age, and pretty much personified corruption, desire, and lust. Ungoliant was essentially darkness in the purest, evilest form. As her descendant, it's hardly a question whether Shelob would be an evil entity. The spider is also not a mindless being. It's a creature capable of thought and decision-making, which is clear when Gollum bargains with her to spare him on the condition that he would bring her tastier treats in return. She also has an uncanny connection with Sauron, who would let her guard his territory in exchange for food. Her very existence is tied to the corruption that Sauron stands for, as she herself is a relic of terror. Shelob represents the fear that dwells in darkness, a trait common with Ungoliant. The depiction of her lair and the horrors that lie within is also aimed at creating an evil aura. The way she hunts her prey and taunts them is a no-brainer, because she does not always kill them immediately and devour them. Sometimes she paralyzes them and then eats them while they're still alive. But even then, some fans say Shelob is not that different from, say, a man-eating tiger or lion. From the perspective of humans, such a creature is certainly not evil, but not inherently bad because they simply choose to eat the prey they feel is the easiest to attack and kill. Consider Sauron sending Shelob fresh meat, in the same way as gladiators who would have to fight with wild animals for public entertainment. The animals are not inherently evil because they're simply chasing their nature, which is to kill and feed. So Shelob could very well be big and bad, but not exactly evil. Carnivorous could also be a term used to describe her. Her story was written by the very people she would prey upon, so she's naturally a villain in that. There are certain characters written by Tolkien that sometimes exhibit emotions that can lead to some sort of redemption for them. The best example of this is Gollum. However, most fans agree that some characters such as Shelob are inherently and primarily evil, with absolutely no hope for absolution. Her instinctual nature to kill in order to feed herself and attain her ultimate goal of being so big that the mountain can no longer bear her weight is a testament to this fact. While she does not care about the One Ring or attaining power or ruling over the world, which most antagonists covet, her evilness is just a fundamental, indiscriminate hunger. She reflects the evil that necessarily inhabits the world and has no scope for salvation. She's indicated to have feasted on her offspring and her mates, and come on, this cannot be someone who's just looking to survive on instinct. The way she reacted to the Vial of Galadriel is also proof that she was innately evil by nature, and this is what we're going to discuss now. Why was Shelob afraid of Eärendil's light, which came from a Silmaril, the very thing her mother Ungoliant desired to consume? Most fans reported that they felt the reason why Shelob was afraid of the light from Galadriel's vial was because of some form of elven magic, or just because she was a creature of the darkness that could not stand the light. However, this is not entirely correct. Galadriel's vial consists of Eärendil's light, which came from a Silmaril, and it just so happens that Ungoliant, Spider Mommy, had a hankering to devour light in any form. Accompanying her master Morgoth, Ungoliant had consumed the light from the two trees of Valinor, which had made her incredibly powerful. However, she did not consume the Silmarils, which were holy and would repel anything evil. As her child, Shelob should technically have craved for light just as her mother did, but as it turns out, she was extremely distressed by the light of Eärendil and could not stand it. So why was she so repelled by something that Ungoliant craved? Tolkien himself does not answer this in explicit terms, but it can be assumed that since Ungoliant mated with creatures far lesser than herself, her children were in no way as powerful as her, even to crave the same thing she did. Shelob is also shown to have been living in eternal darkness, creating her lair in such a way that no light could make its way in. Therefore, when the hobbits flashed pretty much the most powerful kind of light in her face, she was unable to bear it, as opposed to Ungoliant, who would regularly snack on light, even before consuming the light from the trees of Valinor. There's also an overarching theme in Tolkien's works that deals with lusting for things that can destroy the seeker. Morgoth wanted the Silmarils for himself, but he was aware of their potential to hurt him. Similarly, Ungoliant was also probably aware that craving the Silmarils would hurt her, but she still did not give up her desire because it trumped the fear of the backlash she would receive. She was also an extremely powerful entity who could still find some way to regain herself even after consuming that which could be dangerous for her. Her child Shelob was simply a base creature who did not consume light, but feasted on flesh instead. Therefore, the light of Eärendil, which was highly coveted by Ungoliant, ended up being a source of immense discomfort to Shelob, to the point where it was instrumental in her defeat at the hands of a creature like Samwise, who no one could have imagined winning. Tolkien constantly reminds the readers that everything in Middle-earth is in a state of decay. This automatically also insinuates that the evil still present in the world is not as strong or powerful as it once was. Ungoliant, who existed ages ago, was a much greater being than her child. Naturally, a creature that dwelled in eternal darkness and killed and devoured indiscriminately, while not having an ounce of the power and might her mother possessed, was repelled by the light of Eärendil. Does Shelob possess any special abilities? Interestingly, the fruit of Ungoliant possesses a sting, like a wasp, which could be used to pierce and poison her prey. As mentioned, spiders do not have this feature, which is why many fans differ on their understanding of whether Shelob was a real spider or just took the form of one like her mother did. She could also deliver different types of poisons, one that could only paralyze her victims, and another that could kill them. Despite being a giant spider, she was extremely resilient and swift, and her body had layers of growth, which made it almost impervious to any weapon in the world. Her skin, in fact, gave off such a nasty stench that it would probably make her prey faint at the smell, and even if someone would manage to break through the layers of her skin, they would not be able to reach her core, and instead would be sprayed with poison dribbling out from the cut. Shelob did not inherit the ability of unlight from Ungoliant, and naturally, her children did not inherit it either. They all shared the gifts that came with being the descendants of the primordial evil spider being, but Shelob was the most powerful since she shared a direct bond with her. She was able to weave webs that were stronger than steel and darker than midnight, which could not be cut down unless someone someone used elvish metal. She could emit a vapor that was darker than darkness itself, presumably a lesser form of unlight, and this vapor could numb senses and bring about unimaginable despair. She used these tools to trap her prey and sustain herself. Shelob also embodied an immense sense of malefic essence that could be sensed even before she made her appearance. Frodo was able to sense the existence of something extremely evil while he was on his way to Mordor with Sam, and maybe this was because of his senses being enhanced due to the One Ring. He was able to feel her malice and gluttonous lust before she even showed herself. It was so powerful that the hobbits felt paralyzed with fear, despite not even knowing what danger was lying in wait for them. Regarding her actions as Sauron's pet of sorts, it's unclear whether Sauron deliberately stayed away from controlling her and sent her fresh food from time to time. To him, it seemed like she was fulfilling quite an important role without him interfering or bringing her under his domain, so he pretty much let her enjoy a sense of autonomy as long as it ultimately served him. As such, Shelob and Sauron did not have any contact beyond their mutual understanding. Shelob and other adaptations. Shelob plays an important role in Lord of the Rings and was first mentioned in the 1978 film by Ralph Bakshi when Gollum talks about her. However, she did not actually appear. Fans saw her for the first time in the last installment of the Lord of the Rings trilogy. Unlike the book where she appears in the Two Towers, Shelob was made entirely with CGI, 8 feet tall and 7 feet wide, a specter of fear and disgust. She also makes an appearance in the video game The Lord of the Rings Aragorn's Quest, where she's an optional boss at the end of a side quest where Frodo's dangerous journey to her lair is reenacted. In The Lord of the Rings Online, Celeborn had hunted Shelob at the beginning of the Third Age, but was not successful. She's also shown to have a maternal link to all her children, and asked them to come to her after being hurt by Samwise, and all her offspring from different parts of the world, such as Mirkwood, throng to her. She's also shown to be much bigger than her movie counterpart. In Middle-earth, Shadow of War, Shelob is shown in human form in the Wraith world. She's a slender woman dressed in black, nothing like her usual appearance in the movies or the books. This game also showed her to be working alongside Sauron actively, revealing that he used to be her lover before betraying her. The mobile version of the game classifies her as a Maya, which Tolkien had never done. Marvelous verdict. And with that, we end this extensive narrative on Shelob, the progeny of Ungoliant, the terror of Cirith Ungol. She's well known among fans for having nearly foiled the mission of the hobbits to destroy the One Ring. While her life and general existence are extremely badass, her on-screen end is quite anticlimactic since Samwise Gamgee was able to subdue her with the help of the Phial of Galadriel and Sting, Frodo's sword. Her origin is a mystery that is debated in every Lotor forum since her mother was undeniably a tough and uncompromising antagonist. Shelob remains one of the most well-thought-out creations of Tolkien, with the description of her appearance and nature successfully scaring even the toughest readers. She serves as an important piece in the depiction of a world that's constantly at war with itself and is plagued by good and evil in equal parts. Now that we've seen Shelob make an appearance in Rings of Power, fans are eager for more. Maybe we will get to see a depiction of the symbiotic relationship the spider shared with Sauron, as he slowly establishes his base at Mordor, where Shelob is already residing. Who knows, maybe the showrunners might address some of the burning questions fans have, such as whether Shelob could stand a chance in a fight against the Master of the One Ring himself. We'll be back with more juicy stuff. Until then, take care and let us know in the comments your thoughts on Shelob. If you liked our content, don't forget to leave a like and subscribe if you haven't already. Have a good one and be safe. Thanks everyone!